Good morning, everybody. We're going to start the Finance Committee meeting. It's 8:02 a.m. on April 16th. So good morning, everybody. I wanted to start off by saying a thank you and just a recognition to our student representatives. Alessandra is here, and Ella, she had, it was a conflict with one of her AP courses, and it was a very important class on prepping for future tests or quizzes, so she could not meet it. I told her absolutely school is first. So while we're missing her, I'm happy to see Alessandra here. Just wanted to take a moment to recognize you two for attending and participating on the Finance Committee this year. It's always awesome to have student voice and student participation at this level. So just thank you very much for participating and being a part of this committee this year.
Thank you. I've learned a lot and I've really enjoyed doing it. It's been a great experience.
Well, thank you. Okay, we're going to get the meeting started. I need to share my screen if you give me a minute. And can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so we have two agenda items today. And actually, that is a mistake. I will make sure I fix that. I totally missed it. It should, oh, I actually have the wrong presentation up. Please hold. I was like, I didn't think it was first look. I apologize for that. Usually have it queued up. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Got
Okay.
it.
Um, so we have two agenda items. The first is a financial status update for this current fiscal year, and then we have the proposed final budget for the 26-27 year. So we'll get started with the financial update. This is a repeater slide. So we have our approved budget, our revenue and expenditures, and anticipated fund use of fund balance at just under $1 million year to date. We're at about 65.3 million, or 87% of our revenues have been collected or realized, and about 51.1 million, or 67.5% of the budget has been expended. Again, as I always explain, our revenue collection, it always outpaces our expenses through this time period of the year because our property taxes, which is a bulk of our revenue, is collected from July until December. And then what's left to be collected that trickles in throughout the year is state revenue, some monthly EIT, real estate transfer taxes, and our state and federal subsidies and grants. So that's the remainder of what we are looking to collect. And reviewing everything, we are on track to make sure that we are collecting the revenue and its pacing on time. On the expenditure side, I just put a little note so that the committee and anybody watching the video understands what's left for our expenditures. We have the remainder of the fiscal year. It includes the rest of our salary and benefits. What people need to understand is that teachers get paid through the summer. So they're spread out over the 12-month period, even though they're a 10-month contract. So because their salaries get spread out over the summer months and the fiscal year ends June 30th, all of those payments get charged back to the 25-26 years. So really, we don't wrap up our expenditures on our salary and our benefits usually until about August. That's when we truly have totally expended everything. So that's the big part of salary and benefits. We still have utilities, contractual agreements such as our custodial services, security services that are going to go through the end of the year. And then at the building levels, we have end of the year events. So there's trips happening, there's transitional celebrations, and obviously the big one is the high school graduation. So any questions about those anticipated expenditures that we're still waiting on, or information on this slide?
None from me.
Makes sense.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to get into it. This is the 26-27 proposed final budget. So between Dr. Yannicone and myself, we will be presenting the proposed final budget, which we then, once we have questions here, we'll update it a little bit. And this presentation will also go to the full board at the next meeting. So we'll get started, and I will turn it over to Dr. Yannicone.
All right, thanks, Kara. As you know, this is a repeating um, beginning point for us as an administrative team when we're planning the budget for the following year. We try to keep our profile of a graduate and our school district mission squarely in focus. And these are the same 6 core guiding principles that we have utilized over the years in developing the budget. So we hope to meet each of these standards through all of the components of the budget for academic programming, for meeting the needs of all learners, for making sure that our campus and facilities are continuing to evolve and advance. Technology has been a significant point of focus this year, not only in infrastructure, but also in cybersecurity. And then, as you know, mental health, social emotional resources for students, largely in the case of, in the vein of staffing in our clinical teams, has been a primary area of focus with staffing additions over the last few years, and then continued professional learning opportunities for the staff. And we are very happy with where we've landed. We're hoping you'll feel the same way, and we can move it to the next slide. So this year's budget, it's probably worthwhile just to have a refresher to get us started on what this year's budget has allowed the district to do. So I'll begin with facilities. You know that there's been ongoing district-wide preventative maintenance. That includes the phase 3 of the high school roof, which has been a major undertaking over the last few years. We have operational and capital improvements. Among them, in our recent property committee, we discussed the fact that we've had 3 major purchases of equipment for our operations team. That is all equipment that's replacing trucks and machinery that is close to 20 years old. And so it's been important for us to make those purchases this year. In addition, we had our Series 2025 bond issuance, which was the third of 4 $10 million bonds to accommodate primarily the middle school renovation and addition project, but also several smaller capital projects that we're looking at completing over the next few years. And so under facilities, that's been a real success and I think an advantage to the district. In technology, we replaced all of our secondary school Chromebooks, which were 3 or 4 years old, and we've had very positive feedback from students in the changes to those devices, not only with speed and feasibility, but also some of the features. We had a Zoom phone upgrade, the first phase of that, which is moving all of our district classroom phones to Zoom phones. That has allowed our staff to hold virtual sessions with parents directly from their classrooms as they've needed to. And that has been an advantage for sure. And then we're in year 4. Currently, we're wrapping up year 4 of the 5-year current cybersecurity plan. Next year, we'll be bringing forward a new plan for the future. And as you know, that's a constantly evolving challenge for us as a district. But we feel we are in a very strong position with regard to cybersecurity. Under staffing, this year we added a secondary music teacher in the strings or orchestra area, and that was neutrally funded because we reduced a middle school health and PE teacher in order to bring that new position on. And that's been a current, and you'll see that repeated later on in the presentation. We are working very hard if we feel we need something new in programming to see where we can find attritional savings in order to afford that addition. And then we also added several extra pay for extra duty positions to support programs, in particular at the high school level this year. So we have our Relay for Life advisor. We added a JV volleyball program at the high school, which had been voluntary to this point, and now that has been paid. And then we added a third wrestling coach to accommodate the addition of girls wrestling at the PIAA several years ago. So we were able to finally bring that new program on board. And then under salaries and benefits, This is not the total cost. This is the 1 year additional cost for each of our contracts. You may recall that last year we negotiated the STESPA Act 93 and confidential agreements in order to maintain a competitive position in the region in bringing in great talent. And then this coming year, we will have negotiations with SDEA because they will be entering the last year of their 4 year contract. So these were the 1 year additional costs to meet those needs. So we've gained quite a bit as a result of this year's budget, and we'll be sharing a similar informational slide a little later in the presentation as to what we're hoping to gain with the new year. Any questions on this information?
Just so I'm super clear, the 1 year salary benefit line item here is the 2025-26. So what we covered in this past year's budget as a
That's correct.
1 year incremental. And so we'll see what that is in the 26-27.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. And in each of these cases, these are contractual agreements that were signed and settled. So they're obligated
Right.
funds.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, of course.
Yep. So going on to the next, these next two slides are more of a visual to show where our revenue is derived from. The big blue chunk is our local, which makes up about 79% of our overall budget. That's real estate taxes, earned income taxes, real estate transfer taxes, delinquent taxes, some pass-through grants and that funding, but the bulk of that local is real estate taxes. And then coming in at about 20% is our state subsidies and reimbursements, and then at 1% are our federal funds, which include title funds and access funding. And then this next slide shows how is that revenue broken up in our expenditures that makes up our overall budget. And so you'll see that the two shades of blue, the two bigger pieces, those are instruction and support services. So that's the big chunk of salary, benefits, contracts, services, anything that you can think of, supplies that impact educating students. So instruction is direct instruction in the classroom. Support services includes our counselors, our nurses, administrators, and any of those outsourced contracts that go to support student learning. And then non-instructional activities, the chunk of that is our student activities, and such as drama, such as band, and our athletics. And then the green chunk, and I had to break away from the blue. I try to keep into the theme of blue and school colors, but we just ran out of shades of blue. So I thought it fitting that debt service was green because that is the color of money. So the rest of that, the 13%, makes up our debt service as well as our leases, such as our copiers and all of our devices for students and staff. Any questions on these two slides? No? Okay, so we'll just, this is a repeater slide, budget process timeline. Where we're at right now is April 16th. In our finance committee meeting, we are reviewing the proposed final budget. That's the big agenda item. We will be looking to have this presented at our next board meeting as well as approved. As you know, PDE does require us to have this formally approved by the board and submitted. And then there's a minimum of a 30-day waiting period where it's available for public review and comment, and then final budget approval will happen on June 16th. So just a quick review of the budget process. I will keep this very high level. This is just what goes into building the budget and how we are getting to where we're at. My office establishes the revenue budget. We use historical trend and we use external reporting. The business office and human resources department, we create the personnel budget between salaries and benefits. Again, Dr. Yannicone identified the contractual annual year numbers for all of the contracts. It was a really good year because all the contracts were negotiated, so that makes it a lot easier when creating the personnel budget because you don't have any question marks in there. And then building budget administrators create a budget based on an allocation. So all buildings have an allocation that's based on a review of a 3 to 5 year spend, and making sure that all their needs are met. And then departments have a zero-based budget method, which includes a 5 year budget to actual history, and then they focus on cyclical expenditures. Jumping from that, just how we build the budget and who's involved in that, just want to talk about the state of economy very quickly. So as you'll see on this slide, as of March 2026, the U.S. inflation rate is 3.3%, and this impacts the cost of goods and services. This is 0.9% higher than the previous year, and it's attributed to a 12.5% annual increase in energy prices. The energy prices have surged 10.9% in March alone, with gasoline prices increasing 21.2%. So I don't think this is a big shock to anybody that goes and fills up their tank or goes to the grocery store right now. Why this is so important is because I want people to be aware that school districts are not exempt from this. The cost of goods and services that people personally feel or are impacted by the economy and inflation, we are also impacted that way. So I think this is a good outlook to show where the economy is right now and how that has an impact on us building the budget and putting things together. Dr. Yannicone, I don't know if you have any other comments to make about this slide.
Yeah, I just wanted to share the challenge that this is presenting for us in developing this next year's budget. There's an unpredictability and a volatility to the current economy, not only the national economy, but the global economy. And in particular, when we're looking at the potential for fuel prices, for fuel costs, and the impact that those fuel costs have on things like delivery of goods and services, it's making it challenging for us to, with certainty, be able to prepare for some of those numbers. So what Kara has done is err on the side of caution and make sure that we would be covered if we continue to have this volatility in not only the national, but the global economy. So I don't know if you have any questions about that. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about that as we move into the rest of the slides. But I do want to point out it's been a particularly difficult year given what's happened in the last few months.
And I'm gonna let Dr. Yannicone continue on with this slide.
Okay. So in addition to that, general information about the national economy, as you know, we had a difficult state negotiation for the Pennsylvania state budget last year. And if you look at this, the box to the right of this slide, we were supposed to receive the state budget in July, sometimes even in the end of June, and that's a July to June budget. But we did not receive any budget allocations for this year until well into November, so well into the second quarter of the fiscal year. And that presented some significant challenges for all districts across the state. In our case, we're fortunate in that the state is roughly 20% of our budget, and not 80% of our budget roughly comes from our local taxpayers, which is very helpful. However, it was a challenge for the business department and for us as a district. So we are not anticipating that we will receive an approved budget from the state of Pennsylvania this year either. We feel that we're continuing to be in similar challenging situations with regard to the state. And so you can see here what was proposed by Governor Shapiro is $8.3 billion for basic education funding, of which the district would receive just over $17,000, and $1.5 billion for special education funding, of which our district would receive just under $20,000. That sounds okay because we're in the black, which is great, but those are also relatively small numbers given our full district budget. And so we're not really anticipating, first of all, we're not anticipating that full amount getting approved. And second of all, even if it were, these are relatively small numbers given our total budget. Nonetheless, this is what's proposed from the state. In addition to that, at the federal level on the left side of the screen there, which is our monies that we receive typically from October to September, We are anticipating a full elimination of titles 2, 3, and 4, with a net loss of approximately $90,000. And so if everything goes well, we still anticipate a net loss from state and federal funding on the part of for the district. And so Kara has planned our budget accordingly. In addition to that IDEA funding, last year we saw a 5.5% decrease in what we received from the state. And we are not sure whether we'll receive a decrease or not. We do not have a decrease in students identified with special education needs, but the state sees us as a financially solvent, secure district, not in need of the supports that some of our neighboring districts require. And so, unfortunately, we also anticipate a loss in IDEA funding. And the federal government feels the same way, frankly. So, that's not good news for us. The one positive I'll say, or net, revenue neutral, is that access funding has been stable. So over the years, we have been able to continue to provide those supports to students in a positive way. And to be frank, the services that have been offered through Titles 1 through 4 and IDEA, we've been absorbing as a district in order to make sure that all of our students get what they need. But that means increased burden on our local effort because we are seeing a reduction in effort from the state and the federal government. Any questions about this information?
So, Dr. Yannicka, just to back up and make sure I understand this correctly, when we were talking, or when you were speaking about the state, that 8.3 billion, our share 17, and the 1.1, our share 19,000, that's the proposed increases over last year?
The 17,600, I have to correct myself because I missed my parentheses. The 17,000 is a projected increase. The 19.8 is a projected decrease.
Oh, okay. So the 19.8, oh, that's a decrease. All right. So
yes.
And now
so that's tied into that IDEA funding as well.
Okay. So that's a decrease. Okay.
Yeah. This is one of the challenges we've had is that special education costs continue to rise. Right. So as an example, if we have a specialist working with a group of students or individual students, and that specialist salary is increasing, the state is not providing additional services for that, additional income for that. If we have students, as you know, we've added several emotional support teachers at the elementary school. We're not receiving additional funding from either the state or the federal government. That's a need we've identified as a district. And those are costs we are absorbing as a district.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not based on your number of students. We're not seeing a reduction as a district in the total number of students with special needs, but we are seeing a reduction in the allocation being provided to us by both the state and the federal government.
So the state never looks at the number of students requiring those services?
The calculation, Kara, do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, it's a intense calculation. I don't want to say it's similar to the BEF funding formula. It's the same, but there is a calculation that's similar that takes in student weighted average, and you have to remember based upon data, when they do the calculation, they're usually using ADMs from October, so it doesn't take into account inflows and outflows of students coming into the district in a current year, because that's not the basis of how they do the calculation. So there's normally a prior year AFR number that's used, so you always have to think that it's lagged behind a little bit. And then sometimes based upon the formula and how much is being put in, there are districts that win and districts that lose. This year in Montgomery County, there were two of us that lost. This is the first time since my tenure here that I have seen a proposed reduction based upon the fact that he's adding into the special education funding, so it is going up. But based on how the formula is and how the numbers drew out, we're one of the districts that is going to be reduced, because then based upon other numbers at other, as Dr. Yannicone said, higher need districts, that money then gets allocated to them. So
Okay.
it's based on the complexity of the formula. again, I think there's a lot of conversation about both the federal and state governments with the mandates that they have on special education, but the lack of funding that we receive because of it.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
another factor that's worth mentioning, and this will come back a little later in the presentation as well, is there are allowable caseload ratios at the state level for each group of students with special needs. We work hard to stay well under those caseload recommendations because, to be frank, they don't yield the best results for students. And so, and we've received feedback from our community that maintaining a healthy caseload balance or class size, as we'll speak about a little later, is a high priority for our community. And so we've worked to maintain lower class sizes and lower caseload ratios in order to make the work more manageable for our professionals and more effective for our students. But there are many districts that are going to caseload maxes. And so I think because of our strong financial position as a district, as assessed by multiple avenues, and then the fact that we do hold lower caseloads and lower class sizes, we're seen as in a strong position and not needing additional resources as some of our neighbors are.
Okay.
Any other questions before we move to the next slide?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next slide shows how the proposed final budget fell. There's a 3.5% proposed tax increase. We have anticipated expenditures of about $78.1 million, anticipated revenues of 77.4, with a difference that will be supplemented from fund balance at 715,000. And the last three numbers were not done on purpose. It just fell out this way, triple sixes. So we're going to get into how this changed from first look and what factors contributed to this change. You'll see in another slide, if you recall in first look, we were at about 1.2 million with our use of fund balance to bridge the gap between expenditures and revenues. So we've sharpened some pencils and done some things in between that, and we'll get into those discussions shortly. Again, this is a very important slide. It shows the history of Act 1 index, of our aid ratio, and our tax increases. And as you'll see, comparing even year from year on our tax increases, we've maintained relatively small tax increases, especially when you benchmark that against the Act 1 index. Even from last year, we were at 4%. We're at 3.5% this year. And then you'll see over the next 4 years that the Act 1 index is projected to reduce and then kind of flatline out over the last 3 years of those projections. So on the revenue side, just so that you know, because the expenses are going to look exactly the same, first column is our approved budget for this current year. The second column is our first look budget. Third column is the proposed final budget that's being presented today, and then any changes on the line items that happen. As you will see, there was no changes from first look budget into the proposed final on our revenue side. So it stayed status quo. On the expenditure side, there were two significant changes that allowed us to reduce from our first look. To the tune of almost $500,000. We had attritional savings of about $260,000 with staffing, and due to our very strong rating and the market conditions, we refinanced our 2018 bonds, and we also went out to secure about $10 million of new funds for the final phase for our middle school project. Based on the anticipated budgets that we had with the savings for the 2018 bonds and what we anticipated we were going to land at our annual debt service payment for the new money, that those favorable market conditions and our strong rating allowed us to save $236,000 from our initial budget that we thought we were going to spend. Are there any questions on this slide regarding these numbers?
No questions for me.
I'm,
I'm going to give
excuse
you
me.
another look. It's the same look, but just breaks it out into where the categories are. So, Mr. Bedard?
Yeah, I'm sorry. If you could switch back to the last slide. I just wanted to clarify this looks to me, this is the approved budget 25-26, and not the actual expenditures.
Yes, it's the approved. We always benchmark against the approved budget
So
and not year to date.
essentially, you have gone into this year, as an example, working with the functional departments and saying you have a flat budget year over year for those costs. And that essentially is because we know that we have increases in salaries, benefits. We know that we're going to have the slight increase in other expenditures. Nope, that's flat. So you will be managing the departments to essentially a flat budget.
Yes. So one of the things that I've worked really hard since I started here was to, and I've always used like a curve, is to stop this from happening with budgets. We wanted to get to a place. When I first started here, we used a zero budget methodology for all budgets, which means you build from zero and you start up. Because what we needed, and if you recall, Dr. Yannicka and I started very close together. She was in December. I was hired in January. So, working together, one of the things that we worked really hard to do was to make sure that we were providing what was needed in order to operate departments and buildings so that year after year, um, for an example, we wouldn't have the high school coming back to us and saying, oh, this is happening now, so we need to add another $50,000 into our budget. We've worked really hard to make sure that departments and buildings have cyclical items. So, like in athletics, it's a cyclical thing for uniforms, a cyclical thing for equipment, so that they project out over the next 5 to 8 years what the needs are so that we can flatline that so that our budgets aren't looking like this. So that one year it appears that we have this big savings and then the
Right.
next year we have to add it back in. So we've done that with both the buildings and with the departments where we feel very, very comfortable with where their budget allocations are. And we talked about this in the last meeting. I'll give you an example with technology. They're on a cycle with our a device replacement for the buildings. So this is a gap year in which we did not have to replace any of the devices. That number stays within that budget because next year we're going to have to put it back in. The departments are well aware that in those gap years, that is the time if new things need to be included that are one-time costs that we can do replacements in, they can use that gap year to then address a need that happens within the department. So that is the way that we've been able to flatline budgets and to make sure that each year that we're coming back, we're not going up this way. Curriculum and instruction is another one. We wanted to flatline the curriculum and instruction budget so that it can absorb the annual cost of all the curriculum cycles that are going because it's an 8-year curriculum cycle. So one of the things that we do is now we attributed the annual cost each year. We pay for it up front because that's how we have to do it, and then it's allocated each of the years that is applicable for that curriculum. So if you look at the curriculum budget and their cyclical placement, they have about 6 or 7 curriculum cycles going on an annual basis that add up to the budget so that we don't have to come back to the board and say we need $1 million because we're replacing ELA this year. We need 800,000 because we're doing K through 8 math. So we've been able to flatline and work within those parameters, and then they are very aware that in an off year, that is when they have to plan for a new ask or something that is needed. And so we gap it that way. So yes, we are managing with them in that capacity. I think I feel very confident, and the departments and buildings feel very comfortable that we are meeting the needs of what needs to happen to make sure those departments are delivering services and the buildings are giving, the students what they need.
Got it. So, in its simplest form, this budget is saying that we know our salaries and benefits are going up because we have contracts. We know debt servicing is going up because we've got big projects that are fully planned and funded in our capital projects over a course of a period of time. And everything else is basically being held flat.
Yes.
Great. All right. That's good discipline and helpful context.
If I can just jump in there too, I want to highlight, Kara spoke to debt service, just with regard to that net savings under salaries and benefits. And I know you also have this, Kara, on the next slide. We talked about this last year, and we are continuing this process. So, and if somebody's watching this recording, attritional savings means that every time someone leaves the district or retires, we look as an administrative team at whether or not that position needs to be replaced. So as an example, we're in the process right now of interviewing for a math teacher at the high school. We have a retiree from the high school in math. We looked before we committed to hiring another math teacher at what would happen if we did not replace that person. What would the class sizes look like? What modifications to programming would we need, etc. We did not feel that was recommended. And so we're hiring another math teacher. At the elementary level, we have a fourth grade teacher retiring this year. And we need another fourth grade teacher, the class, to maintain what have been our target class sizes, which is 21 to 24 in grades 3 through 5. However, we have a very small class moving from first to second grade this year. And so 2 of our second grade teachers are leaving the second grade. One is going to the fourth grade to take that position, and the other is going to the first grade to accommodate a larger class. And that's to maintain the target size we have for K through 2, which is 18 to 20. So that one teaching position being saved, essentially, we're not replacing the person who's retiring with a new teacher. We're replacing them with an existing staff member. That savings alone in salary and benefits is roughly $180,000 because benefits have become expensive. The remaining attritional savings are because we have 2 administrators for the district, one who left the district and the other who is retiring. And because we are hiring people with less experience, they are a savings just based on salary. So, and we do see those types of attritional savings in new hires as well, depending on the position. So if it's a hard to find position, for example, we're going to hire a nurse for Erdenheim. I've said to Kara, nurses are in demand and very difficult to find. If we find an experienced nurse, we're going to pay for that nurse. A high school math teacher is also a challenge to find. The person who's retiring teaches our highest level math. So that is a challenge. There are some other positions where the pool might be much larger, and we may be able to take an opportunity to hire somebody who comes in at a lower salary. And that may be some additional attritional savings. We won't know that till we move through the full hiring cycle over the next few months. But that's where that 260 comes from. It actually comes from one teaching position and 2 shifts in the administrative team. And we'll continue to look at that as we go. On Monday night, I had my monthly parent advisory. And last month, when we were developing this budget, at my March meeting with those parent advisors, I asked about, what is the impact from your perspective on class size? Because there are districts that have higher class sizes than we do. And we could potentially gain additional attritional savings by raising class size and lowering the total teaching staff. And parents were overwhelmingly in favor of maintaining the class sizes as they are. They actually consider it a draw in the district, a point of pride for the district, and something that has a really positive net effect on our students' learning. And I hear that, I agree with it, but as we're developing these budgets, we just want to make sure that our caseload numbers in special education and our class sizes are having the desired effect on student learning, and that parents feel that that's worth their tax dollars. And so it was overwhelming, that parent advisory feedback. Absolutely keep the class sizes as small as you can. Any questions about either of these items or sort of how we develop those? It's roughly $500,000 in savings from the first look to this look.
That's great information. It's nice to hear the backstories.
Of course.
Okay. So this next slide, as always, we show a variation of options for tax increases and show the impact on what that would look like with the fund balance and as well as the median homeowner. So I'll start over to the right. That's the 3.5 that's being proposed. So again, on fund balance, it's about $716,000 impact with an annual impact of $218 or $18.18 on a monthly basis. And then I'll skip over the 3.25. You can see that. And then at the other end, at a 3%, it would be an impact of just under $1 million on the fund balance, with an impact of $187 annually or about $1,560 on a monthly basis on a homeowner's. This does not reflect the homestead farm stead reduction for all of those properties um, that are approved for that. There is a reduction that they receive on their tax bill. That information has not been certified yet. That gets certified May 1st, so that calculation has not been done. That'll be approved when we do the final budget. And then as you know, we have the district rebate programs. Chief Lesniak and I have not been able to connect, but I'm waiting to connect with him on the volunteer service rebate, which we introduced this year. And then just doing another push on the rebate programs for the seniors within our community. So neither of those homeowner impacts reflect the additional rebates that our district offers to eligible homeowners or first responder volunteer firefighters. Any questions on this slide? And I know, Sean, that you are going to have to check out. Do you have anything before we move on? Because I know you have to leave in a couple minutes.
No, I do not. I do not have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I can just, Kara, if you wouldn't mind, before we go to that next slide, just one thing I want to note, we are well aware that the board has asked us to do all we can to come down to a balanced budget. This year's approved fund balance allocation is 974,000 and change. We are moving in a positive direction towards that aim at 715,666. We know that it's not as low as we all would like it to be. But again, given some of the factors, in particular, some of the unpredictability in next year's economy, we really feel like this is a solid place for us to be. And if over the course of next year we could reduce our reliance on fund balance, we will certainly do it. But we do feel in knocking about 250,000 off of the reliance on fund balance from year to year, we're moving in the right direction.
And Dr. Yannicone, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about what we are getting from the budget we are proposing.
Yes. So as we discussed earlier, there are year-over-year increases in the salaries for each of our groups. We feel like we have a terrific staff. They work really hard. And as you know, given shortages in staffing across all groups, maintaining competitiveness in this Eastern Pennsylvania region is important in order to get great talent. And so this is the year-over-year additional costs. And you can compare the earlier slide to this slide to see there's slight increases in those costs based on the already agreed upon increases in salaries and benefits in each of our bargaining groups. And so those are contractual obligations that we have. The only way to reduce those numbers is to reduce staff. And so we talked about attritional savings, that there is an option for us to reduce staff and therefore reduce these increases. We're not recommending that at this time. We feel like we've got right-sized class sizes and caseloads and staff across the district. But again, if the board felt differently, we could certainly come back with that. New positions, we are continuing to grow the volleyball program, which has been really successful at the high school. And we are now going to move into the middle school, where there's a lot of eagerness for us to add that program there as a developmental program. So our plan is to add one coach this year and then one coach next year. One coach in 26-27 and one coach in 27-28. And then we will be fully staffed in our volleyball programs at the secondary level. In addition, we have a number of volunteer positions, and these are relatively low-cost items. But all of these positions have been volunteers for years, and we really felt out of an equity mindset, out of a fairness mindset, that those advisors should start to be paid comparably to their colleagues who are doing other types of clubs and activities. And so we have this budgeted in to shift these from volunteer to paid, starting with the next year. They're all existing clubs. It's just wanting to move them into a pay status using the teacher's contract. And then in addition to that, under technology, we've got the 5th year of the cybersecurity plan. We also have the Varonis data security platform that we've discussed recently. This is a gap year, as Kara mentioned, on student devices, but that allows us to do some desktop replacement. And so we have some district-wide desktops that we'd like to upgrade, 3D printer replacements across the district. And then we have TV studio equipment at the high school that is 15 years old. So it's okay, but it is not current. And Mr. Meter, our teacher in that TV studio, has made this request. We feel we can meet it within the technology budget. And then under curriculum and instruction, we have one large purchase to come next year. It's our K-8 math curriculum. The plan is to purchase it next year and then provide professional development for our staff, K-8, over the course of next winter and spring so that they're ready for implementation in 27, 28. And then under facilities, we have our ongoing preventative maintenance under the capital plan. And then we have our operations and safety projects where we are moving into year 2. So we're scheduled to do the entire middle school, interior painting and furniture in common areas and classrooms. That would be closer to the end of next year once the project is completed. We've completed all of the painting at the high school in this year's budget. So now we're looking at furniture and room identification signage. The room identification is illogical at the high school. The way in which the rooms are numbered and the way in which they're identified, it just doesn't make sense. So we'd like to correct that. We have one more mower we'd like to replace, and then we'll feel like we're in really good shape in the operations department for some time. We have the Zero Eyes implementation, which we discussed at the most recent property committee. We'd like to add some camera surveillance at Church Road. We have no cameras on that site right now. And so we'd like to add a few cameras there. And then the exterior doors, we're finding that it would be worthwhile for us from a security perspective to replace all of those locks and reissue keys to those who need them. We have a number of community members who have keys to our exterior doors, and we feel like we can tighten that up and minimize access to the building, in particular during non-school hours. Any questions about the additions to the operating budget? There's no new staff in this budget. We're actually reducing staff by 1, as I discussed previously.
No questions?
None from me.
Okay. So the last 2 slides that have a bunch of numbers, and then we're going to do just a wrap up of where we need to go from here, is the budget history that shows from 2016-17 to 2021. Just shows you what was actually approved on the revenue and expense side and use of fund balance, and then what the actuals were, the actually audited financial statements. So you'll see, and I always have to put a reminder out there for the 1920 and the 2021 years is those were the COVID years. So you see bigger surpluses there. There was a reason for that because of COVID and because of the impact on education and school closures, contracts didn't have to fully be paid because services weren't being rendered in a normal manner in which schools were operating as if COVID did not exist. So I always like to point out that those last 2 years, the district experienced a higher rise in a surplus, but it was attributed to the fact that COVID, while it cost some things and people had to shift on learning, there was also a lot of savings because we weren't fully operating in the capacity as we are right now today. And then looking at 21 to 22 all the way to 25, 26, which is our current fiscal year, you'll see that as I spoke about before, we really worked hard to right-size budgets and to get them in a good place where we are meeting the needs, going back to that guiding principles and profile of a student, that we are really meeting the needs to make that happen. So one of the things that we have committed to is, we're always cognizant of tax increases, but we're also cognizant of the fact that we need to keep moving forward. Also, over this time period, there's been some economical challenges that weren't faced in previous years. So we've had to adjust to that. Also, I always put the caveat on the 23-24 school year and the 22-23. That was the Carson Valley years, as I call them. So where we are in 24-25 with our last audit, I was very pleased with the fact that we had brought our fund balance usage down to about 650. And we want to keep trending in that right direction, but I want to make sure that we're trending in that right direction without impacting services and programs, and making sure that we are meeting our goals, meeting those guiding principles, and making sure that we are providing the services and programs that the board has the expectation of. So I think these are very powerful slides. I think they tell a very good message. I think it tells a very good story. We are still sitting strong at about an almost $20 million fund balance. So again, and that is reflective in the fact that we went out for bond issuances and got the rates that we did and were able to garner the savings that we were. So we will continue down that path. It's always a goal to balance the budget, but we want to make sure that we don't do that while negatively impacting programmatic impacts. Any questions on these two slides? Okay, and where we have left to go, today we are requesting approval at the April 21st board meeting that we will be presenting a 3.5% proposed tax increase with the expenditures at about 78.1 million with a fund balance allocation of about 715,000. Again, there's a minimum 30-day public posting and review before we can come back to the board and ask for the final budget to be approved, and that will be at the June 16th meeting. And at this point, there is no anticipated change from proposed final to the final budget. Again, in that time frame, if something were to go topsy-turvy economically or make a significant impact on the numbers that were shown today, we would obviously come back to the finance committee and have that conversation, and that would be a change in the final budget. But at this time, we have no anticipation of that, and we plan to move forward as planned with our timeline. Any questions?
I think, as always, you guys have really laid out a lot of nice detail here. I think you laid out some of the challenges very clearly. We don't know what's happening with inflation over the next 6 to 12 months, so that's a challenge in budgeting. And I think that alone would say if we were more aggressive to keep tax increases lower, we could get ourselves into a bad position. I think we've also stated collectively that we want to see the use of fund balance come down. And we know that this year and the next several years that are projected, the index is decreasing, which makes it harder and harder for us to be able to do that. So for those reasons, I'm comfortable with the 3.5% increase that you've recommended. I think there's a lot of external conditions that would say this is a year where we need to take the full benefit of the index. And then the last point, I do think it's good discipline how you've constructed the budget to ensure that departments are remaining flat year over year while we manage the increases that are just part of our salary benefits and debt servicing. So I'm satisfied with that.
Thank you.
I have nothing to add to what Jeff said, but I do want to echo that what he said. I agree with that 100%.
Perfect. Okay, if there's no other questions, the plan will be this presentation will happen at the April 21st board meeting, and then there will be a motion for the proposed final to be approved at that time. So again, I want to say thank you very much to Alessandra and give Ella a shout out as well for participating. I know this is a lot of numbers and a lengthy meeting, but this is what we build up all year for. This is it right here. So I appreciate your time and your participation on the committee. It's always awesome to have students on. So thank you and good luck with the remainder of the school year for you.
Thank you so much. Have a
All right.
good day.
Thank you. And if there are no other questions, we can adjourn the meeting.
Thank
Good.
you, everybody. Have a great
All
one.
right. Have a good day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.